No worries.
Now I'd like to introduce Stu Barker. Stu's the General Manager of Wild Science, a specialist wildlife management organisation based in Darwin. Been in operation since 1996. Wild Science aim to provide outcomes that improve the cost effectiveness and performance of all aspects of feral animal control programs. Today, Stu will be talking about setting the standard in wildlife and feral animal management. Thanks, Stu. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. I'll get going. Well, basically, I'm just going to try and bring across to you guys today our experiences over 25 years of working predominantly in Northern Australia. Probably a little bit different to Troy in that we're probably on pretty large scale areas where 10,000 square kilometres is nothing out of the ordinary. So, yeah, like Ricky said, we've been operating since about 96. We've conducted, when we talk about wildlife, that includes feral animals as well. We look at wildlife, so it's native, overabundant native species and feral animal introduced species as well. We've worked over about 110,000 square kilometres across Australia, and a lot of our work, because of the large scale of the area, we're using helicopters a fair bit for work, and probably a little bit different to Troy, like I said, and there's a lot of aerial culling and aerial surveying work that we do. So helicopters are a pretty major part. You can use aircraft, but with pigs, with planes, sorry, but with pigs, because of their small cryptic nature, you know, generally you get pretty poor results. And that's one of the reasons with the helicopter, you can go low and slow. And that helps you with a lot of this, with the survey techniques and what we're doing. So you want to go to the next slide, thanks, Real. So I'll start with a bit of a point of controversy here, in that basically we're saying that feral animal management needs a specialised approach in this country, and I think people are starting to understand that, but we certainly still experience a lot of places or a lot of programs where it's a simple, let's just go out and cull, and there's no real long-term benefits achieved. And you know, people have got to realise that you can't improve things that you don't measure. Just going out and shooting a bunch of animals or trapping a bunch, unless you're measuring the changes, you're probably not really going to get a positive outcome at the end of the day. Do you want to move on to the next slide then? So wildlife management, hang on a second, I think I've just got a glitch here. Yeah, wildlife management, sorry, it's just the importance of understanding the populations that you're dealing with and then allowing yourself to plan on how to manage them. And that's the important thing. You need to have the science underpinning the principles that you're going to apply. And unfortunately, I think that doesn't happen. And what we see, or what we have seen in a lot of our experience, is that people come to us and they say, oh, we've got a bucket of money here and we want to go out and implement this program. And straight away, you know, over the size of the area that they're talking about, that they're not in the hunt to begin with. So straight away, the program's going to be adversely affected in achieving an outcome. In which turn, that means that potential future funding is less likely and results aren't going to be achieved. So that's where it's really important to look at the wildlife management. Should be based on best practice type principles, which everyone pretty much is aware of, I think, but we can talk about that a bit later. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, so wildlife management is the management of the wild populations, whether you're dealing with outcomes that might be based on conservation, overabundance, protection of specific areas, or biosecurity for disease impact type situations. So really, wildlife management, it's a numbers game. and you need to apply, again, best practice management approach. And I know Troy touched on it when he spoke about emotion with management. Well, one of the things that we think that when you're dealing with large groups of people or large areas of land and different stakeholders is that you need to try and probably remove some of that emotion and apply a pragmatic strategic approach and get people to understand the reasons for it and what you're trying to achieve. Okay. So best practice management, this is what Glenn Saunders, who most of you are probably aware of, he was fairly heavily involved in the putting together of the standard operating procedures and the codes of practice many, many years ago. And basically his interpretation was that best practice management is a structured and consistent approach of management of vertebrate pests in an attempt to achieving and enduring long-term cost-effective outcomes. So best practice is defined as the best practice agreed for a particular time following consideration of the scientific information and accumulated experience. So with all of that, it's helping us to then implement the right methods and then look at the cost effectiveness and the performance of a lot of these management programs. And I think that's one area when I come back to that initial that slide saying that we need to look at a more serious approach with it is everyone talks about data and the use of data, but when you see a lot of reports that are written, there's a lot of information in there, but there's no real data supporting programs and how they're actually, what they're achieving and how it's changing with a pig population. Okay. So next slide, please. So when we're looking at best practice management approach, yep, you're defining the problem, you've got the trigger, pretty clear and simple. You're developing of a management plan, so that might be what your objectives are, the area that you're looking at, the techniques you're going to use, whether you're going to look at trapping, baiting, aerial shooting, or a combination of the both or all, and the time frame, the period of time that you're looking at trying to do it. Now, those two highlighted ones in there, the control strategy and the planning and data collection and the monitoring, I think is probably one of the areas where a lot of these programs go wrong. In the planning, you've got the survey and you've got an idea of a number of animals, the distribution and the population estimate over an area. Then you've got to sit down and work out what's it going to cost to reduce that population by pigs, say 70%. If it's other large ferals, it might be 50 in the first year. And then the effort that's required in year 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So when I say about planning for the effort, it's like, well, how much time is it going to take? How much helicopter time does it need? How many bullets do you need? How much labour? The logistics, these are all important things that you've got to plan when you're doing it. It's not, for example, with an aerial culling program, the helicopter hours for us, we would work out, depending on the size of the area, the strategic approach for searching the area and the number of animals that you're trying to move. That would then, we can put that into a formula, which will then give us the number of helicopter hours that you need to fly that area to be able to get it down to that sort of a 70% reduction in that first year. And without that, just plucking numbers out of the sky and using them, most people will fall short because they don't have the right amount of time. The other thing with that in the data collection is collecting that data whilst you're doing the work so that you can then monitor the changes to see that what you're doing is actually having the impact that you're trying to achieve. The other thing there is obviously if you're looking at a larger scale is having a good implementation plan and making everyone aware. Troy touched on a lot of that during his presentation, so we won't go into too much detail. and again is evaluating and assessing after each year what you've achieved, that you can go back and informing people of the results so that they're aware of what's happening. Next slide, thanks. So this is something that we often say, that if you fail to plan, you're going to plan to fail. And that's just pushing the approach that you need the right people with the right approach. For example, if you've got a medical issue with a tumour on your brain or something, yeah, you might start off with a GP, but you're going to end up with a neurosurgeon, a specialist, to resolve your issue. And the way we see it is that wildlife management is a specialised field, and it requires a specialised understanding. And I think that approach is coming about in this country, but it's something that I think we've got a long way to go going down the road. Next slide, thanks. So this is just a quick summary of how we see the use of practical science, and it reiterates the previous slide of failing to plan and plan to fail. So it's just showing that you've got maybe what could be classed as a typical type of approach of just going out and shooting pest animals. There's no real data collected, maybe a GPS location and a number shot, which really isn't telling you very much at all. There's not much there to measure against anything. No clear real objectives. It's just, we're going to go out and reduce the numbers 70%. Everyone talks about it, but what are the numbers? What are you trying to achieve? There's no real plan. Short-term results could be that, you have perceived that you've dropped numbers and you think you've saved money because it hasn't cost too much. The long-term or the medium to long-term results is you're going to probably get a likely increase. And the overall, you're going to get an increase in the control population, increase in costs, and you're going to be back doing it all over again. Where the other approach is that we use as a standard is, if we go out and gather the baseline information first so that we can plan. Once we've got the planning, then we can start working out what we need to do, how we need to do it, set the goals, set measurable achievements that we want to get to. Then we can go out and start delivering that program. And in that program, you're getting in the short term a drop in the population, but you're able to measure that. You've got that information there. In the medium to long term, you've got the supporting evidence of that data showing the reduced impacts, or the reduced population, shall I say, and how significant it's been. And over time, what you should end up being able to do is reduce the overall cost of that program being effective. So that I'll give you some examples a little bit, or coming up, of some of the data that we've collected showing these changes and how you can use data to support what you're doing. And this is really important when you're talking about long term, which is what's going to be needed for the National Feral Pig program, is that you need long-term objectives. You need to know that you're going to have this program running for a long, long, long time, because once you get the animals down, it's not going to cost the same amount as it did when you first started, but the cost per animal could be way more. But that doesn't matter, and I'll show you some results and some data that supports these sorts of approaches. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this slide here is showing a long-term pig project. It's on about 1,000 square kilometres. The interesting thing about this project here was that from 96 to 2007, it was a fairly proactive approach to the program. In 2008, things changed with management and the approach changed, and it basically became a reactive type program. So what it's showing there is that significant the blue bars there is showing that the number of pigs seen per hour flying was on a downhill trend. And in 2008-9, when it basically started becoming an ad hoc program, the numbers recovered very quickly, which pigs are very capable of doing, and most of you are already aware of that. And then, because it's been basically reactive, the amount, and what this table here doesn't show is the amount of effort that is in there. So in the period of time where the blue bars are from 96 to 2007, that was a combination of aerial shooting, groundwork, using dogs, bailing dogs, and also Judas pig collars. In 2008 onwards, it was basically just an aerial shooting program. So, and that just sort of shows, and the two red bars, sorry, in that graph too, the two high ones, that was just a survey. So they weren't actually shooting. So you can see in there's periods of 5-6 years where basically there was no shooting done at all. And again, with this program, only 1,000 square kilometres, so it's a pretty small area, relatively speaking. You got neighbouring properties on either large-scale neighbouring properties on all around you that were basically doing no control at all. So you want to go to the next slide, please? So what this is showing here is when we were doing the groundwork, we're also collecting aging data off the pigs, just to help support the changes in the population that we're seeing. So when you look at it in about 96, it was a pretty typical sort of a expected spread of ages of animals, about a third of older animals, middle-aged animals, and the younger type animals. And then if you think back to where that previous graph was, you can sort of see that as the population was reduced, the number of older pigs resident on that place dropped right down to very low numbers, and the bulk of the pigs on the place then were around 2 to 3 years old, and they were young pigs that were coming back in from outside. But if you had a look at a distribution map of that area, which I don't have with me for this talk, is that there was very few pigs in the centre of that block. Most of the pig population then was around the peripheral edges. And so then that allowed us to target most of our effort around those peripheral edges and create that boundary and a buffer, so as to speak, for the middle of the property. So we used teeth eruption to do that, not size, because size is an accurate measure or description of age. So we found this to be quite good, and when you link the two with the other information, it's quite an interesting fit. So if you go to the next slide, please, Ariel. So this is some information that we used for planning on a floodplain area. Just to give you guys an example of what the sort of thing that you need to be looking at when the planning stages are required. So basically you had a floodplain area of around about 342 kilometres. We knew from the survey that we had a density of around about 3.3 pigs per kilometre there. So that gave us a population of around about just over 1,100, thereabouts, 1,100-1,200. So wanting to achieve a 70% reduction, that gives you around about the 800 mark. From that, knowing the size of the area, the population of pigs, the numbers that we were trying to reduce, we needed helicopter flying time of around about 35 hours. Now, that when we talk about flying time, I'm just getting a wind up from Heather, so I've got a bit to go. So I might have blown this a little bit close if the timing. But again, it just comes back to the planning, is that the flying time is the time to get the machine down there, the refueling, all the rest of it. And the search time is the actual time looking. So from that, we used 28.4 hours of search time, and we culled 968 pigs there, which was about an 86% reduction. But what that's not showing, if we can quickly flick to the next graph, please. This isn't that same case, but what this is showing is the change in the pig population. So in a shooting program, you can see the blue dots, the first 10 to 12 hours, the shooting rate's increasing. So that rate wasn't changing. That rate was still sitting up about 48 pigs per hour culled. Then in the next period of time, from about hour 12 to 16, the next 5 hours or so, that rate was starting to taper off, and it was dropping down to around about 25 pigs per hour culled. If that program had been kept going and got it down to around 10, you'd see that line at the top flatten right down. That's starting to show that when you're doing these culling operations, that you've got a systematic program in place that you can search these areas over and over again, because flying them once, you're not going to see probably 50% of the pigs. You need to repeat fly these areas to get them. And depending, in some areas, you might only see 10%, depending on the vegetation types that you're dealing with. So quickly go to the next one. This is just talking about cost per animal culled and giving you an example that at the start of a program, this was actually with horses and it was in Queensland, but the same principles apply. At the start of the program in year one, we were using around about 32.5 hours and costing $30 an animal. And there was nearly 1,000 animals culled. By year 7 and 8, it was up to around about $2-3 grand an animal culled. But the total cost of the whole program had come down to around about 5,000 or 6,000. So when people say that they stop culling because the program's costing too much per animal, that's a good outcome. That's what you want. You want to look at the cost of the entire program. What's it going to cost to them maintain it? Now, this program here, that was a horse population of a couple of thousand. And still to this day, you probably only need about 5 hours every couple of years of aerial flying time to keep that population down to a handful a year to be culled. So, yeah, I better tidy up on that. There is more information there that I can show, but we'll probably run out of time, I think. Heather? Oh, okay. I'll keep going.
Sorry, Stu. You probably are running out of time because it's we only have around 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah. Okay then. Okay. Well, we might just pull it up at that. But the point is, it's about being able to measure what you're doing and being able to have a look at how things are changing, so that you can then make adaptable decisions on what your next stage is. And that's going to be really important with the long-term management of feral pigs in this country. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Stu. Yeah, again, a lot of information there